Polio. Today, on the 18th day of my action, I will speak about options for population stabilization. On this side, we have the three options that have been invented by the system. They are war, the tried and tested method, then depopulation by vaccination, and the latest notion the system has come up with is depopulation by AI. And on this side, we have my option, which is a population stabilization law. War is the option that has always been employed as a last resource since the formation of the United Nations in 1945. And we see that wherever the United Nations fails to stabilize the population, either because they can't create the political will in that nation to apply population control methods, and then the military moves in, NATO moves in, or the Russians move in, and they bring the population down by force, install a puppet government, and that puppet government then proceeds with the methods dictated by the United Nations. We see this now happening in Israel-Palestine because the population there went completely out of control. A landmass that can only sustain 1 million people now has 14 million people. And we see this in many countries around the world. War now is ready to explode on all fronts it just exploded yesterday between Israel and Iran. Once again, Iran is also a frighteningly overpopulated country that has also run out of water. It has 60 million people more than it can support. That's 2/3 of the population. And war is about to explode between India and Pakistan, basically about water and control over Kashmir, between South Korea and North Korea, and of course between China and Taiwan, and the many desperate countries in Africa where the population is collapsing due to famine, where law and order is collapsing due to famine and poverty. But this option cannot work globally. It cannot work in developed nations because they have inverted population pyramids. So the problem in these nations is not the young, and war kills the young, it is the old. So if you initiate war, a real war, let's say between Russia and NATO, because what we have now between Russia and Ukraine is a fake war. If a real war were to be started for the sake of reducing the population, it would not work in the developed world because it would kill the young, and that's the last thing we want to do. We already have too few young. The bonus now for the population control program in developed nations is to kill the old, not the young. So it would be not only counterproductive, a war, but the exact opposite of what the developed world needs. War will work in the developing world if we were to return to it as a method of population control. There, of course, they still have these kind of population structures with too many young people, and war will kill the young. But I would hope that we have progressed to a more advanced level of civilization, and that the system does not intend to murder 3-4 billion people in the developing world through war. Even if that were possible, which I very much doubt, there are simply not enough weapons of mass destruction in the world to kill that many people, unless the nuclear arsenal is being used, in which case, of course, it's the end of the world, the end of mankind. So that's a no-go. War, it's not going to work. It may be used on a limited basis, in specific countries. Take, for instance, Afghanistan. It was tried there first. The Russians tried it in the 1970s. They did not succeed to bring down the fertility rate of Pakistan, which was the intention. The intention was to stop population growth in Pakistan. That is why the Russians invaded. They did not succeed, and then In the 1990s, NATO moved in, the United States moved in with the same intention. They managed to bring down Afghanistan's total fertility rate from circa 7 to 4 children per woman, but then they got stuck because they could not convince the Afghani leadership to introduce chemical methods of population control. In other words, to start poisoning their people, just as the West and much of the world is doing. And because they could not convince Afghanistan's leaders to do so, the Americans simply left behind their arsenal and placed the Taliban back in power so that the Afghans can continue to kill each other for decades and would have all the arsenal they would need to do that. And as we can see, Afghanistan has been entirely abandoned now, and the Afghans are just killing each other and are starving. The other method, depopulation by vaccination, has been in the making for more than 20 years. It was kick-started in 2020 with the COVID pandemic, but it has failed. In no small part due to the fact that I warned the world in 2016 that this is what the system intends to do. It intends to replace chemical depopulation methods with biological depopulation methods. Why? Because biological depopulation methods, vaccines, can be targeted and can be used for specific purposes. So the young can be vaccinated for the purpose of sterilization, and the old can be vaccinated for the purpose of killing them, of reducing lifespan. And whereas with chemicals, the moment you start poisoning the food system and beverages and water, you are poisoning everybody and you are creating sickness, disease, sterility throughout the population. And while that may be okay in the system's eyes at the beginning of the demographic transition, when you start with population structures like this, it makes no sense whatsoever once you ended up with inverted population structures and the old need to be bumped off. The depopulation by vaccination strategy that was kickstarted in 2020 managed to kill about 30 million people and to sterilize or to prevent about 30 million births, which is a drop in the bucket considering that the system needs to eliminate 1.6 billion, that's 1.6 billion elderly between now and 2050, and another 3 billion between 2050 and 2100. And the system will not be able to achieve this with a depopulation by vaccination strategy because people now have smartened up and the system has run out of idiots to inject with mRNA vaccines. So that's a no, that's a no. The latest idea concocted by the system is that of depopulation by AI. And we saw President Trump announce the Stargate project in January, standing there beside Albert Bourla of all people, who is the CEO of Pfizer. What an idiotic idea for Trump, right after the pandemic fiasco, to stand on the same podium with Albert Bourla, one of the greatest mass murderers in human history, and announce the Stargate project, a $500 billion investment in AI infrastructure, and then brag that AI will be used to detect cancer early on, and then to design personalized mRNA vaccines to cure cancer. Yeah, of course, like anyone is going to buy that. Who in the right mind would trust their health and lives to parity machines, which is what AI is, or are, the AI chatbots, machines that also hallucinate? You have to be insane or a mental retard to do that. And of course, people have no trust whatsoever in the system, have no trust whatsoever in the church or in their governments. And Trump, that idiot of a president, believes that he can give the military-industrial complex now data centers all over the country powered by mini nuclear reactors to introduce this method of population control via AI and vaccination. Of course, that was made too obvious, and that was only a decoy. The true intention of the depopulation by AI strategy is to poison the world with nuclear contamination, to create energy scarcity, energy that deprives people and is instead used by machines, by data centers and artificial intelligence, and then to create mass unemployment. Mass unemployment in turn creates mass desperation, and mass desperation will lead to chaos and to an early death. This is the true plan behind the AI depopulation strategy, and of course the system intends to use AI to also limit the population in terms of consumption through cryptocurrencies, so digital money, the 15-minute cities, and of course having the population observed at all times of day and night in order to control people's movement and control people's actions and consumption. And I suspect that the system also intends to use AI medicine, to design synthetic proteins that will have the same effect as vaccines. They will design synthetic proteins and administer them to people under the pretext of healing their chronic diseases, whatever they may happen to be, but instead, of course, killing them much faster. Okay, so these methods are obviously not going to work. I hope that you have not aligned yourself with the depopulation by AI strategy. I say this because the first thing that came out of your mouth when you are elected to the seat of St. Peter's, of the church, when you became Pope, that your main subject or cause is going to be AI, and you frame that in terms of caring for the working person. In other words, make sure that AI does not displace people from their work and cause mass unemployment. Of course, that is a valid subject, and it needs to be addressed. But the only way you're going to address that successfully is by simply shutting down AI, because the purpose of AI, as I said, ultimately is depopulation. Now, the only decent and sane option is my option, a population stabilization law with 3 components: replacement level fertility, required assisted dying, and optimal population levels, that is implemented worldwide by a planetary well-being authority, a new global organization that will replace the United Nations and that will enforce this law globally, and also make sure that resources flow freely in the world as the pressures for them is decreased along with a decreasing population. Because all the problems we have nowadays are generated by an increasing population and therefore increasing competition for resources, which leads to the depletion of vital natural resources at a much faster pace. The option that you have to take is obvious. It is this: align yourself with this and speak up now, or else you're going to go down in history as yet another ignominious pope who just oversaw yet another aspect of the depopulation and genocide. Look, for instance, what happened with Pope Francis. He will remain in history as the Pope who pushed the depopulation by vaccination strategy. You will remember the video recordings that Pope Francis made encouraging people to get vaccinated, which were disgraceful because he knew very well that these vaccines were meant to kill, sterilize, maim, and sicken. And I suspect that is why when Pope Francis died, I was, by the way, in Barletta in the south of Italy at that time. When Pope Francis died, nobody on the street blinked. In fact, if anything, I noticed a sense of relief and of happiness among the population that Pope Francis died. Life went on as normal. Nobody stopped for a single second. Nobody shed a single tear. But what else can one expect when, as Pope, you oversee a program of mass murder? And with a soft voice, you tell people to accept being vaccinated with what you know to be deadly vaccines. So that was a grotesque action on the part of Pope Francis, and this is going to haunt him through eternity, and it has tainted his legacy forever. Don't let the same thing happen to you. I'm giving you a choice just as I gave Pope Francis a choice. Pope Francis made the wrong choice. I hope that you will make the right choice. Thank you for your attention.